Guess we'll get started. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be tuning in from. I'm Leanne Fleischer and happy Tuesday. Today, we're continuing our discussion on codes and standards, and Robin will be chatting with you guys. He's got a presentation. He's going to go over some different codes, et cetera, and I believe Tony is going to be joining us when he is free in the next few minutes. So with that, Robin, are you ready? Let's turn it over.
Ready.
All right, thanks,
All right.
Robin.
Welcome back, everyone. Always happy to see your smiling faces here. It's those that turn on your camera. I'd love to see more faces if you want to let me know what you look like. You know, it's a lot easier talking when you can see other people's expression. It helps. But anyway, today we had a little bit of confusion regarding who was going to be speaking. And so I have something prepared that I think is going to be as good or better, because I'm right in the thick of all of the, the permits and standards and codes. And this Tuesday is really open to just anyone. Doesn't have to be a NOAA member. So we really want other people that are out there to get on this call, not only to learn the standards and codes, but also, so we get to know who some of the other people are that are out there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started on this. Let's see, I've got a PowerPoint here. The beginning, and minimize that. So anyway, it's called Codes and Standards for Tiny Houses on Wheels. The first question that usually comes up is, do I really need a building permit to build my tiny home? And then the second question is, do I need to have my home inspected and certified? And do I need a building permit? It's kind of a loaded question. And the answer is usually yes and no. Whether you're building a structure or a dwelling, a shed or a home, and there might be some square footage requirements. So if you're building an RV, and you're placing an RV, the only time you may need a building permit is if you're going to live in it full time. And most people buy tiny houses to live in them full time. If you're going to rent it out on Airbnb, put it in an RV park, treat it like an RV, then no, you do not have to have a building permit. But when I took my quote unquote park model to our RV park and put it in the RV park, they required a building permit. And I had to tie it down like a mobile home. I had to put skirting on it. They didn't inspect the unit itself because that was inspected by the DOT or the Transportation and Highway Safety, National Transportation and Highway Safety Administration. But I did have to have a permit. And every year I have to buy a little sticker, pay my taxes, and put it on that. So that's how that plays out. But there are certain structures that you can build in certain localities that don't have to have a permit. And one is a pole barn or a shed under a certain square footage. And that depends on locality to locality. I believe it's 120 square feet in most areas. Structure less than that, you do not have to.
Away goes Robin. Robin.
Oh, sorry, my mic was muted. What happened?
Robin,
Did he drop out?
oof, he's gone. I'll text him. Well, I'm sure he's probably trying to get back on. He is out of town, so his internet might be a little. I'd be happy to keep talking about, but I don't have a clue. Stand by, folks. I'm texting him. Oh, there he comes. There you are.
So, did you guys miss me?
Yes.
I'm in a hotel and every once in a while it just blanks out and I have to go in and put in my room number and my last name and the internet will start back up again. So I apologize. But where did I leave off? Or should I start all over again? Can somebody tell me where I was?
You had just said, let me move these happy people.
So, well, let me just crank it up here and I'll go quickly. Do I need a building permit? Yes and no. If it's a structure, some structures don't need building permits like pole barns and sheds. But if you're going to live in it, if it's a dwelling, you do need that. So here's a question. If you guys will put in the chat, I would love to find out what you guys think makes a home a dwelling. Can you put in the chat what you think makes a home a dwelling? And I'll give you just a minute. And Leanne, can you see the
Yes.
chat?
I can
All
see
right.
it, yes.
Does anyone have the word stove or range or cooking device?
Sharon said adequate building envelope / insulation.
Okay. Well, the answer is a cooking. In other words, it's a home once it has a stove in it, a range. You know, when I get permits, as you know, I can have outbuildings and surrounding buildings, but it's not a home until there's a stove in there. And if I put 2 stoves, then it's a duplex. And if I put 3 stoves, it's a triplex. So it's the stove that makes it a dwelling, a single family dwelling or a multifamily dwelling. That's how they call it. So in most areas, you can't convert a shed or a pole barn legally into a dwelling unless you're in a very rural area that really doesn't worry about the building codes. And here's, you know, everybody has building codes. All 50 states have building codes. The trouble is, not all jurisdictions have the manpower to enforce those building codes. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. All right. Do you need a contractor when you're building your tiny house? Do you need an electrical contractor, licensed electrician? Do you need a licensed plumber? Put in the chat, and I can see the chat here. So if you'll put in the chat, do you think yes or no? Do you need a contractor, a licensed electrician, or a licensed plumber? I'll wait just a minute here. Do you guys know where the chat is down at the bottom, the little chat box at the bottom there? Okay. All right. I like that answer. And the answer, and you guys can probably still, you can see these chats too, but the answer is, if it is an RV, if it's built to ANSI 119.5 or NFPA 1192, you do not need contractors or licensed electricians or licensed plumbers. It's a good idea, especially if you don't know what you're doing, but it is not a requirement. That's one of the loopholes and one of the reasons why people like to build them to the RV standards. But the other answer is if your jurisdiction allows, and most of them do, allows you to do what's called an owner builder permit, you can build your own tiny house on foundation with permits and everything without having to have licensed electricians and licensed plumbers. Still a good idea if you don't know what you're doing, but you can be your own contractor in most areas. They haven't taken total freedom away from that. And the last question is, can I live full-time in my tiny house RV? Does anybody want to hazard a guess? Put in the chat whether you think you can live full-time in your tiny house RV. Note the word RV. And the answer is maybe. The answer is maybe. Most jurisdictions won't let you live full-time in your tiny house RV. However, we're going to go into some jurisdictions and we will show you what's going on in the world with building standards for tiny house RVs. All right. What if I just say I'm camping? I'm not living here full-time, I'm camping. In the jurisdictions will normally, if you're camping, they'll say, well, you can only stay here 7 days, you can get here 30 days. The most I've seen is 180 days. So I've seen these tiny house in an RV park where people are living full-time, and every 180 days they get in their car, they hook up their truck, and they hook their tiny house up to it, and they drive around the block, and they might park in a different camping lot at that point, and then they live there another 180 days. Most of them don't even worry about that because it's one of those things. But there are areas of the country like Arizona that says a park model is allowed as a dwelling. And if you're living in one of those areas, then even though it's considered an RV, you can live full-time in your park model RV. So that's one thing. And then other jurisdictions like LA passed an ordinance that you can live in your movable tiny house as permissible and permanently habitable accessory dwelling, which is the main word, dwelling unit, which means you can have a full stove in there. What people do to get around a full stove is they have a removable cooktop, 2-burner cooktop, and take it out, and that will satisfy, oh, I don't have a stove, it's just a cooktop. And they can have a microwave, but they cannot have a stove, quote unquote. So that's what's happening in that area. And in Brevard County, Florida, they're saying that it can be a primary residential structure, which means a dwelling, as long as it's built to the ANSI 119.5 standard. And but what I also alluded to a little bit earlier was the enforcement of these statutes and ordinances, as opposed to the statute itself. There are places, many places in Florida before the tiny house world came into existence, where people would live full-time in their park model RVs. Florida is a snowbird state, and the state has decided, we're not going to enforce that. The state of Oregon has tiny house laws on the books. However, they have elected not to enforce those laws. And so there's a difference between having the laws on the books and actually having the enforcement of those laws. All right. And then Maine has, which has passed the most lenient tiny house world, says tiny home means a living space permanently constructed on a frame or a chassis and designed for use as permanent living quarters that A, complies with ANSI 119.5 on plumbing, propane, fire, and life safety and construction, or National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA, standard 1192 on plumbing, propane, fire, and life for recreational vehicles. Does not exceed 400 square feet, and it does not exceed dimensions allowed on public highways, which means 8'6". So you could not. This is what I'm going to talk about the actual standard here in a minute and why it's so confusing. But this is a confusing part of it. You can't have it. You can build it to NFPA 1192. I mean, yeah, you can, and it's fine at 8'6" or less, but you can't build to the ANSI 119.5 in that. The vehicle is without a motive of power. It can't be a motor home. It has to be a towable type thing. And they say it does not include a trailer, a semi-trailer, a camper trailer, a recreational vehicle, or a manufactured housing. So they're specifically eliminating all of those items. But what's really interesting is the fact that they are putting ANSI 119.5 there. I would think if they wanted to leave it as lenient as possible, they would have just said NFPA 1192, but they didn't. So talk about those standards here in just a minute.
Robin,
Yeah,
Ron wants to know, can you just go over the legal definition of park model?
sure. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah. All right, here we go. If you guys are interested in this, you guys, if you're a member, you can go to NOAA Certified and go into the member portal and click on codes and type of housing. And you got this really good chart that kind of explains everything. But here you have ANSI 119. I don't think I have. This is the link to it. I think. Let me check it. Yeah, that's the link to it. That's not available to you, but the 2009 is available to you. It's no copyright on that. And in there you can see the definition of a park model. And in that definition, in the newer editions, it has, they also spell out that it is, they have definition of a habitable room. Good thing I have my glasses on. I wouldn't be able to see this. Let me get a little bit bigger here. All right. Propane and vehicle. Okay, here we go. It's called a recreational park trailer in this one. It's a trailer type that is primarily designed to provide temporary living quarters for recreational camping or seasonal use that meets the following criterion: built on a single axle mounted on wheels, having a gross trailer not exceeding 400 square feet in the setup mode. And in the newer versions, it says less than 400 square feet in the setup mode. And if it's less than 320 square feet in the setup mode, it would require a special movement permit for highway transit. So they actually put on the newer that it has to be 8'6" or wider. But basically what they're saying is that it would need a special use permit in order to be defined as a park trailer. So 8'6" means You don't, if it's less than 8'6", you don't, and by 13.6 tall, you don't need to have a special use permit in order to transport it. But, and then see, it says certified by the manufacturer as complying with the ANSI 119.5. And that's important, guys, because if you look on the NOAA standard, it says builder certifies compliance with the NOAA ANSI Plus, or the ANSI Plus standard, or the NOAA Plus standard. It'll probably say NOAA Plus standard and ANSI 119.5 and NFPA 1192. But it says the builder certifies, because by definition, the builder or the manufacturer certifies that it's in compliance with that standard. And NOAA verifies that through the inspection process that we do that it is, it does, meet those ANSI 119.5 standards. So we're, but that's an important distinction that you guys probably would need to be aware of. All right, let me get back to my PowerPoint. Yeah, and you guys can raise your hand or put, we forgot to say it for those of you that are new on today. You can raise your hand, or you can put it in the chat, questions in the chat, and Leanne will either save them to the end or jump in and interrupt what I'm going through here. And I don't mind that, because I'd rather do that. All right, NFPA 1192, and let me, while I'm not sharing my screen, while I'm sharing my screen, let me show you that one too. Yeah, here's NFPA 1192, and it's got a lot on propane. It's got a little bit on plumbing. It's got a little bit on egress, secondary means of egress here, and smoke alarm requirements. But most of it is safety. There are all these warning labels that you have to do, where your curtains can be so they're not close to the stove. All of this is for the propane and the gas cooking. About half of NFPA 1192 is for that. And then the rest of it is just, fire safety and life safety provisions. There is absolutely no structural requirements in here for the NFPA 1192. It does have something for DOT. Here they have the rise and run of the treads if you're having any stairs in your unit, this is a kind of a confusing formula, but it does work. And the guardrails and the handrails are in there. They were just put in this 2018, and we adopted them in 2019. And then the plumbing system talks about the plumbing system and the HEPA valves and stuff that you can use in here. It talks about pumps and water leakage. And then what I'm going to want to get to is holding tanks and stuff. What I'm going to get to is the end. It talks about venting right there, anti-siphoning devices. They do have a lot in towing. They have tongues and A-frames. They have safety chains. They have tie downs for trucks and campers, which wouldn't apply to tiny houses. They have the lighting, the different tail lights and turn signals. And because these are RVs that are being towed around a lot, so they have a lot of those types of things, the type of connection that you would have to do. But in here, they also show you, and they, require brakes on all the axles for a certain size unit. But I wanted to show you this right here. This is a figure for the egress window that you're putting in your tiny house. And as you can see, and this is in ANSI 119.5 also, it is an ellipsoid. It's not a rectangle. And it is 24 by 17. Major axis is 24, which is the horizontal, and 17 is the minor axis. And what this can do is if you have a loft and you don't have space in a place in your loft to put an egress window, there's no, maybe it comes down too low on one side, or you don't want to put an egress window, or you haven't put an egress window in your loft, you can put a skylight that is, most trusses are 24 inches on center. So that means you have 22.5 inches between the truss. So they make a 24 by 24 skylight that has a rough opening of 22.5 by 22.5. And if you take this ellipsoid, it will fit into that skylight perfectly. So if you do want to use this as a means of egress in your tiny house, if you're building it to either ANSI 119.5 or NFPA 1192, you can do that. And the other thing is the turning radius here. What you do is you put your tape over top of the ball, and you have an imaginary line running perpendicular to that unit, and then you move your tape clockwise or counterclockwise. Stick it out 47 inches and turn it clockwise 42 degrees, and you should not hit anything for your appliance garages or anything that you put on the tongue. I usually measure it by taking and running 90 degrees out here. If you can see my cursor, run it 90 degrees out and then come back 45 and then 42. And if I don't hit anything, I'm good. And the other measurement is 40 inches. 40 inches above the ground, you can put these cantilevers, these over anything you want after you get up above 40 inches. So that's kind of an important number for those of you when you're designing your tiny house as into the standards of RVs. All right. So the NFPA 1192, which is one we just went over, it's good for van conversions and schoolies because there's really no structural requirements in there. We, the structure is the school bus or the van. But there's a lot of labeling, like I said, for life safety and fire safety. And it's good for homes that you're going to be using as RVs and towing around a lot. Or if you're just going to put it in an RV park and rent it out on Airbnb short term, that standard is okay for that. The challenge is that it's not structural. Now, if you already have a tiny house built, we will probably inspect to this standard, the NFPA 1192, because we can't really have you tear off the walls to show us the structure and the headers and everything. And if you don't have them, we can still certify your home to 1192. The only challenge you will have is if you're putting your house in like Brevard County or a place in California that wants it to ANSI 119.5, then if you are doing an as-built, you need to let us know that it's going in one of those locations and you need it to ANSI 119.5, and we will have you deconstruct some areas so that we can see how it was built in order to give you that that seal. How we doing, guys? Am I going too fast? Are you getting some of this? All right. Now we move to ANSI 119.5. It's good because it has some structural guidelines and it has a lot of things like HEPFO valves that we couldn't use in there. But the crazy thing is, we don't build, almost all of you guys probably know this if you've read ANSI 119.5, we don't really build to ANSI 119.5. In other words, it says you can use 2x3 studs. We won't let you do that. It says you can use R5 insulation. We won't let you do that. It says the trailer frame needs to be an 8-inch I-beam with 1.5 inch Z-bar cross members and what the outriggers look like. Well, nobody does that. Nobody that I've seen. I did see one this weekend, and he says it's the last one he's going to do like that. But everybody's going with the the 2-inch by 5-inch or 2-inch by 6-inch tube steel for your main runners, and your tube steel for your cross members and outriggers, or L angles for outriggers. So so that's not in ANSI 119.5. And there's no wind loads or seismic loads or snow loads in there. We do use the ANSI 119.5 for your primary and secondary egress, but I wanted to point out in there that it says that the primary can be an 18-inch wide door, and I never see one, but it can be. And then the secondary means of egress could be either a door by 18 inches wide by 4 foot high, or it could be that ellipsoid, the 24 wide by 17 tall. So pretty much not too much in the standard is being used. There's just too much that we build it like a home, not like an RV, so that when these jurisdictions spell out, we want it to ANSI 119.5, it doesn't really mean anything to us as builders, because we go above and beyond anything that it has in that standard as far as structural insulation or energy or anything like that. And we don't follow the guidelines for the trailer. So, and the finishes are not like, they're more like a home. Even though ANSI, most park models do have, they don't have to, they can be built to the regular SIPS panels with the aluminum on both sides of a 1.5-inch piece of solid poly expanded foam. But some park models are built that look more like a house, but they don't have to meet the ANSI 119.5. So any questions on ANSI before I move on to IRC? If not, I'm going to move right along. All right. IRC, International Residential Code. There's IBC, International Building Code, for mainly for commercial, then IRC, and then IPC, and International Plumbing Code, and mechanical, and IEEC, which is the energy code. There's a lot of issues with trying to build to that, but we can almost get there. First of all, there's no prescribed floor system as a chassis. So when you're building right on your chassis, it's difficult, and it's actually impossible without having an engineer design it and stamp it as a floor system to build to IRC. There's no prescribed floor system. You can do wood, you can do cold form steel, you can have a concrete floor system, but the chassis as a movable foundation is not. And then the other thing is the foundation is not. It's a the closest, if you're going to build a IRC tiny house, movable tiny home, it's almost impossible, because they're going to require a perimeter foundation or a pier foundation that goes below the frost line. You can either build it in masonry, concrete, or wood. You can put wood below ground. There is prescribed foundation system in IRC for that. And then the Appendix AQ, which used to be Appendix Q, doesn't work with tiny houses because of the height restriction on wheels. When you get a tiny house floor system up 22 inches off the ground, you can't get the ceiling height below, which minimum for the bathroom and the bedroom is, and bathroom and the kitchen is going to be 6'4". So if you put the bathroom and the kitchen there and then put a loft above it to try to get the minimum 6'4", you can't get your 56 inches in your loft, which is what you need in order to have the head height standing on the landing to go into the loft. So that Appendix Q doesn't work for tiny houses on wheels for that reason. And let me undo this again, and let me go to Upwork. or upcodes, that's what it is, upcodes. So here's upcodes. When you're building to IRC, and just so you know, we will eventually, if we don't have a standard by, well, soon with the ASTM initiative, there may be some people calling out as early as January of next year, calling out Florida IRC, and that's going to be in Colorado. So we'll go to Colorado. And so what you're going to do with Colorado, if you're going to put a tiny house on wheels in Colorado, it's going to be built to the Residential Code of Colorado, which is IRC 2022. Just like it sits, they have no amendments, which is unusual. They take 2022 building code. And so if you go here and you go to foundations, you can see that they have a certain exception here that have buildings. They have a few exceptions and seismic requirements, but they spell out the load bearing, the materials. They have wood foundations, they have concrete foundations, they have the material spelled out for the concrete. On the wood, they have minimum widths. I don't know if you can see that. Let me get this. Yeah, they're not letting me look at it, but you get your spans of 1 story on slab, you know, for your load bearing value of your soil. They actually go all the way through that for your foundations. And then they call out, you know, a slab on grade, a crawl space, or a basement. And with all of these, you're either going to have concrete with masonry walls, or you're going to have concrete with piers if you're going to be having a crawl space. And those are the requirements for that, for those slab on grades. And anyway, that's all. This is how it spells out. So it's when we call prescriptive requirements, these are the waterproofing requirements for your basements and things like that. There is nothing in here for a tiny house or a chassis. I mean, for a tie down, like a HUD home, like a mobile home. And that's really what's going to be our best bet when we get into that. And in the floor system, they have a wood flooring, glue lam. They got, you know, on centers. They have all the bracing. This is all prescriptive for a floor system. What you would want to, you know, dead loads, live loads. One of the challenges that a jurisdiction had for tiny houses with ANSI 119.5 is it calls for a 30-pound roof load. And in he's in Colorado. Yeah, he's in Colorado. No, was he in Colorado? No, he was in Idaho. In Idaho, they have snow loads from 50 to 150 pounds per square inch PSI. So you would have to build here's your ground snow load form, and these are the member spacing and the roof widths and all of that. So you have everything here you need to calculate what size members you would need in order to meet the snow loads and the live loads. Excuse me. On that. But in here, they do have these are the floor systems. They tell you how you can notch and how you can drill holes, where you can drill holes. I mean, it's all spelled out in the building code in IRC for it. And they also have in here the floor sheathing, and they also have a cold form steel section here, which they spell out for cold form steel. There's your sectional for that. And concrete floors that are on grade, they have that, and exterior decks. So with that, we just don't have anything for tiny houses on wheels. And so that's why that doesn't work. And then the last thing I wanted to do on this section And I won't pull it up, but you guys can look at it yourself, or we can, Leanne, remind me to put it in the emails or the chat. It's called NFPA, Applying Building Codes to Tiny Houses on Wheels. That's a publication from March of 2017. We're a National Fire Protection Agency. It has a lot of good stuff in it on how they suggest to building code officials, or what they call the authority having jurisdiction, how to apply tiny houses on wheels. And in that, they basically say that the loft could be a raised bunk bed. And so when we start writing our standards, that's what we're going to push for, is that the loft would be a raised bunk bed and not a loft. Because if you see a lot of bunk beds that are built, and they don't have, the height, from the top bunk to the ceiling on an 8-foot high wall, you'd have a bunk bed. You don't have a lot of space there. You might have 36 inches, if that. And in order to have a loft, according to Appendix AQ, you have to have at least 35 square feet with 36 inches of height in it. And a lot of builds right now, if you put a 212 pitch on your tiny house on a shed roof, you're not going to get 35 square feet in your loft with one wall, no less than 5 feet, because you'll have to come back away from with a 212 pitch and a 13.6 ceiling height and a 22-inch floor height. You just can't do it. And get that 5-foot minimum linear, one direction has to be no less than 5 feet. And you have to come in too far to get 36 inches. All right. Let me go down to, this is the last slide. How are we doing, guys? You guys hanging in there?
Tony has joined us.
Tony, hello, Tony.
Hello, hello, hello.
Glad to have you here. Do you want to assist me on this slide here, if you would, please?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll start it out. And correct me if I'm wrong, but normal homes that are built they pay a lot of attention to, is it chapters 1 through 4? Did I get that right?
Well, yeah. Of which article, though? Because the National Electric Code basically consists of articles.
Okay. Well, I called them the first 4 chapters. Article, in other words, Article 550. Let me back up then. Let me go backwards on this. Article 551 is for travel trailers, and Article 552 is for park models and parks.
That's correct, right?
But the rest of National Electric Code doesn't mean it's eliminated. You can't just use Article 551 and Article 552 was what I was trying to say.
Yeah, so this is what happens. We inspect to ANSI 119.5. So ANSI 119.5 directs us to use Article 552 of the National Electric Code. Now, 552 covers most items that we usually encounter, but it also does refer us to, in 552, it does refer us to other sections of the code to use. And if 552 doesn't address a particular item, then we can go to other parts of the code to address that, whatever that would be. In most cases, 552 does cover pretty well, pretty much of everything. But if you actually look in National Electric Code, 552 is listed as park model.
Yes. Yeah. And then 551 is for the travel trailers. And
It's for the travel, correct.
When we do schoolies and tiny houses as builts, we're using 551, correct?
Correct, right. And that, which is a much more, I guess I want to say, lenient code. It's really a more stripped down code.
Okay. All right. Well, 551, if the unit is larger than 8'6", then we can't use 551 and call it a travel trailer, correct?
Right, right.
So we have to use 552. All right. Next question. In 551, does it tell you where the outlets have to be for the electrical cord hookups to the unit?
Yeah, 551 specifies where all your utilities are to be hooked up to the unit. 552 doesn't. It allows you to use your own discretion where you want to use it. But 551 requires that all utility hookups to be on the driver's side of the home. And that would be as if you were at the tongue looking at the house, it would be on the right-hand side. And then it also requires the electric and water hookup to be within the last 18 feet of the home on the driver's side, or you can be on the back of the home as long as it's within, I think it's either 24 or 36 inches from the corner.
I think it's 18. I think it's 18.
Yeah, it's not very far.
Not very far, and it might be 15 feet on the driver's side. So look it up yourself. You know, when you're thinking that, but that could be problematic if we are doing an as-built and it doesn't have that. We may have some issues. And also, how do we handle the lighting on 551? Because it does spell out for some indicator lights and some clearance lights.
Yeah, under 551, you're required to have clearance lights on the home at the in the front and in the back up high when it's on the highway. Now, some of the builders elect to do temporary ones, and some of the builders actually build them in. But if you don't have them and you're moving it down the road, and it applies the same thing with 552. Really, if you move it on the road, you are supposed to have clearance lights on them.
Okay, and so if you hire a mover, he should have lighting required. If he should know the requirements by the DOT, whether it's and you are going to probably hire a mover if it's wider than 8'6". You get a special use permit and do that.
Right, and
but if you're doing it,
yeah,
if you're doing it yourself and you're towing it, if it's less than 8'6", and you can, or even if you have a CDL license and you can tow a wider one, those are things to pay attention to. There's red lights on the back and amber lights on the front.
Right.
Let's talk about ground rods.
So ground rods most of your municipalities are going to require the ground rod. Anyway, we don't inspect for them because your home is on wheels. So when you take your house and you place it on your property, even if your municipality don't require it, which I don't know of any that don't, you would want to drive a ground rod anyway and attach that ground rod to your trailer frame.
Well, a municipality, the ones that I've heard of, Tony, if you take it to an RV park, you don't have to have a ground rod.
Well, that's in a park, but I'm talking about on your own property where the municipality is going to bring out power to it. They'll require it to be grounded. In the RV parks, they have their grounding system already installed.
Yeah, it's a ground wire that's on the pedestal at the park, and when you plug in to that, you have 2 hot leads or 1 hot lead depending upon 30 amp or 50 amp, and then you have your ground there. If you're going to be there for a while, would it be a wise idea? Would anything be wrong with putting a ground rod or 2 ground rods in?
Nothing will be wrong with it. I don't know whether or not you would get in any trouble from the park, because underneath your home running, you're going to have septic system pipes running and water pipes and electrical lines, so you don't know where all that is.
That's
So
true.
if you decide to do that, I would clear it with the park. But normally, especially if it's a newer park, normally the park's grounding system should be adequate.
Okay. All right.
Excuse me, guys. We
yeah.
had a question from Ron about the lights. Can we just go back to that? He said, can the lights be left up to the mover then?
Yeah, absolutely. A mover will automatically look for those lights. If you don't have them installed, he will put temporary ones up there because he will be the one getting tagged if an officer or somebody sees it being moved without those lights.
Absolutely,
Thank you.
absolutely. And so let's talk arc fault breakers. In 552, is there any mention of arc fault breakers?
Nope.
Well,
In
first of all,
normal
what are
homes, in
what
normal
are
house-
arc fault breakers, Tony? Can you tell us what those are?
Yeah, they're a breaker designed that if you're going to have a fault on the circuit, that they would trip and it's almost like having your GFCI protection on your outlets and so forth. Your arc faults will trip if there's even a minor fault on the circuit. And in regular house wiring, you are required to have arc faults, but they have not adapted that to tiny houses yet. In
Yeah, it used to be
552, there's
just,
no. Yeah, I was
It
going to say
used to
there's
be
no
just
reference.
bedrooms, wasn't it? But now it's everything in the house, just
I
about.
think I think it
lighting.
has moved to everything. Yes.
Yeah.
Initially, it was just bedrooms.
Yeah, and the difference between a GFIC, the way it was explained to me, and our GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupter, and the arc fault was the GFCI is like in a wet area where there's water, it will trip at 7.5 amps, whereas the arc fault breaker was designed for where you have, say, an extension cord that runs underneath of a chair accidentally, and it rubs and creates an arc, not a short, but just an arc that would break. It could be a fire hazard, and it would just break the breaker. So why aren't we putting them in tiny houses, Tony?
They just don't require them for whatever reason. There could be I don't know why, actually. It's just they haven't included it in the codes yet for it.
All right, and
They don't require, also, they don't require them in RVs or, as far as I know, they don't require them in manufactured homes yet either.
you mean mobile homes, manufactured
Mobile
homes?
homes, mobile homes, yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting. But are they hard to put in if you end up having to, the municipality says, well, if you put arc fault breakers, I'll give you a CO. Are they hard to put in?
No, they go in almost exactly the way a standard breaker goes in. The only difference is the arc fault breaker will actually have a white neutral wire attached to the breaker, and you take that and you attach that to the bus bar. But they fit in a normal slot. The only thing is they're at least 3 times the price of a standard breaker.
Yeah. Well, wasn't it used to be that you could put the neutral and the ground on the same bus bar?
You still can if you're in a home and then there's only a single primary panel. But all these homes are required to have their panel set up as a sub panel, which means that you actually have to separate that neutral and the ground bus bar. The ground bus bar has to be attached to the panel casing itself, and the neutral has to be isolated from that. And then what you do is you ground that, which is actually called bonding, but a lot of people don't understand that it's bonding. So we use the word grounding. You have to ground that ground bus bar to the trailer frame itself.
And how do you do that?
You have to do that with a number 8 copper wire going from the ground bus bar directly down to the trailer frame. And where you attach it to the trailer frame, you really need to clean off the paint that's there and make sure that you've got a good attachment. And then after, you can go ahead and paint around it so that there's no rust. But before you attach it, you should clean the paint off, scrape it off, and make sure that there's a good metal bond to it.
Do you just put a screw in there and wrap the ground wire around it, or do you have a?
Well, we do have some builders that use a nut and bolt, and that's okay. I mean, the code says that you should use a lug, what's called a lug, but some of the builders just use a nut and bolt, but it will serve the same purpose as if you clean that surface before you put it and put it on, and be sure that the nut and bolt is very tight.
But a better way to do it would be with a grounding lug, which.
With
the
a grounding lug, absolutely, that's
screws
the best
right
way to do it.
Makes a
Right.
good connection, and then the wire goes into it, and it's, it's compressed. When you tighten it down, it actually, clamps itself in there
Right.
really, really well. All right. What about the metal roof
Yeah,
and?
I was going to say the same thing applies to the metal roof itself. The metal roof is required, all metal parts of the exterior of the home is actually required to be grounded. So the metal roof you have to do exactly the same thing. You're going to use a number 8 copper, has to go from that metal roof down and directly to the trailer frame. Now, some of the builders have tried bringing it down from the roof and going into the panel to the ground bus bar, then out of the ground bus bar down to the trailer frame. It seems like that's okay, but it's not. It's the code says that the ground wires are not allowed to be broken. From point A to point B, they're not allowed to be broken. So they consider that broken because it's stopping off somewhere and then continuing on. So you can't do that. They both have to be individual. So at your trailer frame, you're going to wind up with 2 connections.
Or
One
more.
would be for the electric panel, the other would be for the roof.
Yeah, or you could have more connections. In other words, if you have metal siding and metal roof,
Oh, yeah, but you
they
can have
don't
more.
connect.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
might have more. But
Right.
what if the metal roof and the metal siding are connected, at the top there at the ridge, or I mean
Yeah,
at
then-
the eaves,
then-
and they're all,
Then all you need to do is ground the metal siding itself to the trailer frame.
yeah. And the reason for this, guys, is if a live wire happens to lay against the metal siding, these things are on wheels, and rubber is an insulator. So if the siding is made live by a live wire that came loose or rubbed or something like that, and you walk up to it and touch it, then you're the ground and you're going to get a good shock. However, if that siding is grounded to it's bonded to the frame, and the frame is bonded to the ground bus bar in the unit,
Panel.
when it's plugged in, then it's going to pop a breaker.
Yeah, and the other thing is when you put your, some of the builders are use pretty long screws doing their siding and doing their sheathing. So if a screw happens to poke through and hit a wire or so, it's going to give you the same thing. So it can energize that metal portion of the outside portion of the house, and that's what you don't want. And that's the other reason why also it is really a good idea to always, if you're going to park this somewhere on your own property, to drive a ground rod, and that rod is attached to that trailer frame, because that's also going to protect you.
Right. No, exactly. Exactly. All right. Last question. When do you need a main disconnect and when do you not need a main disconnect?
Okay, so let's start with this. A lot of the builders misunderstand what that is. And they'll say, well, I have the electric panel right here, and like 2 feet away, I have my power cord attached to the house. Well, that power cord is a disconnect. The code does not see that power cord as a disconnect. Even though it can function as one, it is not one. So the code says this: if you have up to 5 circuits, or up to 6 circuits, I'm sorry, once you exceed 6 circuits, you have to have a main disconnect for that electric panel. And it has to be within, it has to be within reach of the electric panel. But we get a lot of people misunderstanding that, also thinking that they have to put in a separate box, which would act as a disconnect. And that will, but the only thing they really need to do is have a double pole breaker in their electric panel and run their main feeder cable to that double pole breaker. And that serves as their disconnect. So the other thing is, we've got another question that comes up is, well, I bought a 100 amp electric panel and it has a 100 amp main circuit breaker in there. And do I have to change that because I've only got a 50 amp service? So no, the code does not look at that breaker as that it's protecting. It looks at it only as a disconnect. So it can be 100 or it could be a 200, even though you only have a 50 amp service. It is only looked at as a disconnect.
Okay. All right. Any other things that you can think about in the electrical realm that, why do we run two 20 amp circuits to the kitchen?
I was just going to get to that. That's our, that's the thing we hit, I guess, more than anything, is the National Electric Code under section 552 points us over to 210. And in 210, it says that there must be two small appliance 20 amp circuits over the kitchen counters in the kitchen. And when it refers to small appliance, it's actually meaning anything other than, it can't be a microwave. That doesn't count as small appliance. Dishwasher is not a small appliance, those kind of things. And these two circuits have to be over the kitchen counter. And it's not just two outlets. It must be two separate 20 amp circuits on their own separate 20 amp circuit breaker. It also requires a similar in the bathroom, that the bathroom itself must have a single 20 amp outlet in there that serves only the bathroom, and only outlets in the bathroom that are above counter. So we get a number of people that say, oh, well, I'm going to put in a compost toilet, but it needs a little fan. And so I have a little outlet down the bottom there. That can't be on the same circuit because it's not serving a counter.
Can you run lights off of that circuit?
There's two different rules on that, but anyway, in 2020, they changed the code on that and said that that circuit can no longer, it used to be allowed, but it says now that that circuit is no longer allowed to feed anything else in that bathroom other than the outlet, which is within the area of the sink, and any other outlet that would be above the counter, but nothing else.
How about an outside GFCI off of that circuit?
No, it can't feed that.
All right. So basically,
the circuit itself is not the thing is, the code specifically says the circuit itself cannot leave the bathroom.
Right.
Now, there is an exception though. And the exception is that it can only leave the bathroom if it was going to feed a second bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only exception in there.
What about the GFCIs in the kitchen? Can they feed a light?
Yeah, they can feed other things.
Okay. All right. So just to clarify, we're going to have one bathroom, which most tiny houses only have one, and we're going to have an outlet in that bathroom, and that outlet has to be on its own designated circuit, or a dedicated, what do they call it? Dedicated circuit?
Dedicated circuit, right.
Yeah. But if you do two appliance circuits, small appliance circuits in the kitchen, then you can run those two, and say you have 4 outlets in the kitchen, you can run one GFCI, and then from the load of that GFCI, you can run the other outlet, and that one does not have to be a GFCI.
Right, as long as the first one protects it, yes.
Okay. All right. And then you can also run some lights off of that.
Yes, right.
As long as you don't.
The only thing you can't run is the refrigerator.
Okay. So the refrigerator needs to be on a dedicated circuit?
No, it used to be years ago, but they changed that. It doesn't have to be on its own dedicated circuit, but it cannot be on a GFCI circuit. Cannot be GFCI protected.
That makes sense, because if the GFCI pops, and
Right.
the refrigerator turns off, all your food's gonna spoil.
Right. And the other place that a GFCI is required, which we're getting some of the builders missing that, is in the laundry for the washer. There is a GFCI that is required for the washer. And actually, it's also required to be a 20 amp circuit.
And and also the outside circuits. Do
Yeah,
they
so
have to
of
be
course,
20 amp?
any outside circuits would have to be GFCI protected.
Do they need to be 20 amp?
No,
They can be 15.
yeah,
All right. Can you use I've got a 20 amp wire, number 12 too. And I'm wanting to use, I've got more than one outlet on it. It's not a dedicated circuit. Can I use 15 amp outlets?
yes. If you have more, yes. If you have more than one, yes, you can.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions for Tony? He's got a lot of a wealth of knowledge here. We're kind of running over a little bit, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop sharing and we can chat for a minute if there's any questions. If not, we can wrap this up pretty quickly. Anybody got any questions on these? All right. Well, I think we covered it all then. Are you guys totally confused? This is all good. This is all good. This stuff right here is sometimes not interesting. For some reason, me and Tony like it. It's like we get into this stuff,
See, actually, I think Leanne likes it too. I get messages from her. I think she's
Hey, I took notes.
there. You go.
I'll be ready to build my own house soon.
All right. All right. Well, guys, thank you for your time and attention. Oh, no, Ron has his hand raised. If you want to recognize Ron, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, how do you recommend connecting the ground wire to the metal roof?
The same thing, I would recommend you use a standard grounding lug and use a normal bolt and washer. Make sure that you use a lock washer on it though, or a locking nut, because you don't want it to come loose.
Do you make that connection at the peak of the roof underneath the cap, the ridge?
You can make it actually anywhere on the roof. Most of the builders wind up using a corner somewhere, but you can actually make it wherever you want. The thing that some of our builders are forgetting is, which is important, and that is, if you look, your roofs they're already coated, they're already painted, and you really need to scrape that off where you make that connection. And that's really important on it, because you got to remember that wire, as small as it might be, is going to be protecting you and protecting your house.
Good stuff. Good stuff, guys. It's all good. All right. Well, that being said, send it back to Leanne to wrap us up and bring us on out of here. Thanks for
Wrap it up.
Tony.
Thanks for joining us tonight, guys. Tomorrow we'll have Scott Banta, who is continuing he and Robin continuing the discussion on development of a tiny house community. He has a wealth of experience and knowledge that he'll be sharing with you guys. So tune in tomorrow, same time, same place, and have a super good evening. Thank you for being here.
Good evening, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Tony, we usually send out a debrief email, so if you just click on that. Oh, wait a minute, Ron. Go ahead and Ron's. Oh, got his thumbs up. Well, Ron, you got. Thank you, Ron. I thought it was a hand up. All right. Well, Jordan, you can go ahead and wrap it out and send out the debrief if you don't mind. Thank you guys for coming once again.